Welcome to another Accelerator Lab Coffee Chat, another one with no coffee, but a fantastic guest that we have today, and that's Francine Pickup. Hello, Francine.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this chat.
My pleasure. It's good to be with you.
Yes. So the reason we have Francine today on the podcast is to talk about something that now is becoming a bit of a mantra among the network, and it's something that Giulio, head of the Bangkok Regional Innovation Centre, coined. How do we engage the mothership? With the 60 Accelerator Labs, one of the big risks that we're trying to avoid is really having the labs become a sort of a silo in themselves, a niche consultancy that really operates on the margins of what the country office does. Instead, the question is, how do we leverage this capability across the full UNDP country program and policy and operations work? And the reason we have Francine on the podcast is that she's had this really brilliant quote a couple of weeks ago that said, question, how do you accelerate an impact in a country of 1+ billion people, leveraging really only 3 people of the lab? And obviously it's a trick question because she's not going to be leveraging just 3 people in the lab, but the full country office. But what we would like to talk about today is how has Francine led an effort in country office India, where she was a res rep up until very recently. She's moving on to be a res rep in Serbia country office. And what are the things that the team has done in this regard? The Accelerator Lab Coffee Chat is really a troublemaking effort between Millie and Cal. Cal, anything that I missed to say at the beginning to start us off with Francine?
That's perfect.
Okay. All right. So Francine, maybe, to start us off, the question is, you ran recently a 2-day retreat with a full country office team to identify very specific ways in which Accelerator Lab can be leveraged, mindful of the fact that the team is not yet on board, to support full country office work. So if you could tell us, what are some of the specific questions that you used to frame those 2 days? And how did the 2 days go?
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you very much. Yes, I mean, this has been a really tricky question for us in India, how we can get the most out of the Accelerator Lab opportunity to really bring about change in such a massive country. I mean, the development challenges that we see in India are very large, if not overwhelming. We have 800 million young people under the age of 35 that are now looking for jobs, demanding services, at a time when, actually last year, 11 million jobs were lost, mainly in rural areas, mainly amongst women. And we know that automation is going to cut the number of jobs available further, because many people are in the low-skilled work that will go when machines operate more. And at the same time, we're seeing huge problems like climate change. IPCC report last year identified countries like India as particularly vulnerable, and already around the country we're seeing food production go down, more extreme weather conditions. Cyclone is hitting India just today, and much greater water scarcity, which is going to add further burdens. We're seeing protests by farmers in rural areas. So these are some of the sort of major interlinked development challenges that we're facing. And as a relatively small player in this picture, we are really asking ourselves, how does one intervene with the Accelerator Lab in a way that really does make a difference? So that's the sort of the macro challenge. I mean, at a more practical level, India is a middle-income country. The change that we see taking place and the innovation all around us is just dazzling. If I can give an example, when I first arrived, my first public meeting in one of the states, Haryana, I was put on stage with the chief minister, who was showing a tent full of thousands of people how to use an app. He was in his 70s, but he was using an app to show people how they could order a cup of tea that was brought to him while on stage. But actually it was about mobile money and how technology in the hands of the poor can help people, ordinary people, manage their funds better. The following week I was in Hyderabad, another state, talking to women organic farmers who were using organic pesticides made out of chili, neem, garlic, tobacco, and other cow dung and other things to double their yield, pesticide to double their yield, reduce their costs, and then selling these organic tomatoes to the newly opened restaurant in the IKEA store. And again, the simplicity of the innovation and the link with sustainable business was really impressive. And so we're in a situation where the government and communities are 10 steps ahead of us, always. And so how do we stay relevant, not just relevant, but actually ahead of the curve and offer the country solutions that are actually attractive and relevant? So that's the question, you know, or to put it glibly, how to have an impact with 3 people in a country of 1.3 billion. And so we've been going around this issue. Should this Accelerator Lab be in a state? I mean, states can be as big as 220 million people, you know, or should it be at the national level? Should it be focused on one specific issue, perhaps a government priority issue, or should it be on multiple issues? Should it be located inside UNDP as a kind of tool to support programs, which is kind of the way it's being presented now? Or is it more a platform that's located outside the organization that's working in partnership with other types of organization? So these are the kinds of questions that we were looking at. And so we decided to organize this 2-day workshop with Giulio to really, as a country office, prepare the mothership and start understanding where we go. And so we organized this workshop around the 3 main sort of concepts to the Accelerator Lab, being 1, what are the patterns that we see across the portfolio, and how do we identify signals outside to really help us, you know, adjust our portfolio so it's really relevant. Then 2, how do we actually find those solutions outside? Where do we look? And then 3, how do we build experiments to help address those solutions? So those were the sort of 3, you know, basic things that we were looking at. Ultimately, for me, it's about finding ways to make our programs and projects more relevant and to improve the way we partner and communicate. And that was the challenge that I set for the office. Now, in terms of the way it went, I mean, it was incredible. The energy that we saw in the office unleashed. I mean, if I compare a normal working day in the office with the energy I saw at the 2-day workshop, it was phenomenal. And so the question is, how do you bring that level of energy and excitement into our everyday work that we saw there?
Maybe just a quick question on that is because you said, you know, the energy of it. I would have expected, given the scale of issues in India, quite a bit of apprehension from the staff in terms of, you're bringing 3 people to deal with all of this. It's crazy. It's insane. So I would have expected apprehension, and you say bringing them all together for 2 days to discuss how to actually leverage this brought about excitement. What do you accredit that to?
I think we addressed, I mean, we always talk about team building and the importance of working well together and having systems in place internally if we're going to be responsive to the world outside. And we say that all the time. Having brilliant individuals is not enough. We need to be a team. But I think it was because we approached the issues in a totally different way. We didn't start with the three programmatic pillars to the office. we started in a much more personal and experience-based way, where we talked about our personal lives. We talked about how to make ourselves feel uncomfortable and do new things. So I think the entry points and the tools that we used in the workshop were different to normal, and that took us outside of the office environment. And the conclusions that we came to at the workshop were arrived at through different tools and different methods. And I think that's what was so refreshing about it. I mean, doing silly things, marshmallow challenges, or building a ridiculous experiment out of junk from the home seemed silly and frivolous, but actually had some very deep and profound, implications that people were able to understand immediately. I mean, we identified some very important sort of pain points, I would say, that prevent us from being the kind of office that is ready for the Accelerator Lab. That is pain points that are preventing us from being the relevant type of organization that we want to be, and that we realize that we have to change to be different. I mean, and that was through those exercises. So the first, I think, main important realization was that we do not have the solutions. We often assume we have the solutions, and we're telling them or we're teaching them to those outside. And it was very, impactful to see that actually, no, we don't have the solutions. We can't be arrogant like that. And we have to learn from this fast changing world outside. That's number one. Second is we have to listen. And there was a very interesting exercise on reading Goldilocks' story, and then and then seeing how much we listened to the story and how much we were using our assumptions about the story. So listening to others, so hearing criticism when it comes from donors, we definitely don't do enough of that. And then when we get requests, responding to them quickly. I mean, the number of requests I get from government and other partners, how many of them do we actually respond with a proposal or an idea or a concept? Very few, I would say. Are we following up properly, and then with the speed that's required? So that was a second learning. If I think of one example of where we are doing that, the government asked us to develop a predictive model for the kinds of skills that are needed for the future, and we developed it within a few weeks and presented it back to the government. I mean, that's the kind of sort of experimentation that we need to show. And I mean, just on the assumptions about, that we have to challenge our assumptions that we have the solutions. One of our best projects now is from a circular economy project around plastic waste management that started outside us. It started in a district in Madhya Pradesh. Now we're scaling it up with partners to more than 50 cities. So our role isn't coming up with those solutions, it's identifying those solutions outside and then looking at how we can scale them up. I mean, a third important lesson was the importance of collaborating, and we talk about it a lot, but I think this concept of platforms is a really good one. So where we come up with the solutions together. We've just launched an SDG financing facility, which is taking that collaborative platform or approach, especially with private sector partners, and we need to do much more of that. A fourth learning was around hierarchy, and I think, other offices as well, it's not unique to India. We have very hierarchical structures within our organization, so we need to break that hierarchy down and empower young people. And I think the workshop was very good at identifying and recognizing the huge potential that young staff can bring in an office. And so that building that trust between people in the office and breaking down that hierarchy was an important fourth learning for us. And then finally, communicating. We need to learn to be what we called uploaders of information, not downloaders of information. We need to share the knowledge that we have, and then also learn from others, and position ourselves and tell people about what we're doing. So the importance of communication was also emphasized. Those were the 5 sort of key learnings for me from the workshop that came out of quite, silly exercises that you wouldn't necessarily think at face value would lead to anything, but actually they were very powerful.
No, it's really interesting because, we started with having this 2-day gathering to talk about how do you leverage a lab. And it really sounds like it turned out as more of a very sort of proactive discussion around how do we as a team become more effective doing what we do. So this was
it's not about, at the end of the day, it's not about innovation. It's about some very basic questions like, how do you work effectively as a team? How do you partner effectively with others? How do you break down hierarchy? These aren't questions about innovation. These are questions about basic good ways of working that will help us to engage and be ready to engage, the mothership, and engage better with the outside world.
Yep, absolutely. Cal, over to you.
Francine, in the workshop, it sounds like the participants have come to some pretty uncomfortable conclusions. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how, these exercises actually lead to conclusions like, we need to improve the way that we communicate with partners, and that, you bring the whole office around that, or that we need to do a better job of listening, that we don't have all of the solutions.
Well, I mean, I gave the example of the Goldilocks story. I think that was a very good example. And I, at the time, thought I knew all the answers. And then, and the point became very, very clear to me. I mean, the story was read from beginning to end. It's a story that we know, like, we think we have the solutions on development issues. You mention an issue and I reel off in my head the list of how you respond to that issue. And then when you hear what he had actually read, it was something very different from what I had assumed. And so it was really making the point that, we've got to challenge our assumptions that we know how to respond. And actually, in a world that's changing so fast, there are new solutions developing all the time. And if we don't properly listen to those solutions out there, we'll keep coming out with the same project documents that are becoming less and less attractive to partners. So that was one important sort of lesson from that Goldilocks story. And the second is the thing that came out again and again is the importance of empathy and really, tapping into that commitment and engagement that we have with our staff and making them understand how their work relates to the things that they're deeply passionate about. And so when people at the end of the workshop said, this has given me life skills, you realize that it's not just equipping them with skills, it's affecting their behavior. And that's a much deeper level of understanding that will be very important when we move forward with the lab.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that we often ask around these kinds of workshops is, what are some practical actions that the country office team is taking forward, following the next 2 days? And I have 2 questions about that. One is, did you have concrete practical actions to take? And the second one is that the right question as well, right? Because sometimes we get stuck in these patterns of doing very practical workshops and we skip over, many of the things I think you talked about at the beginning of our conversation around speaking to our own purpose and what matters to us personally. So one is, did you have those concrete actions? And 2 is, what do you think of that question even more generally?
Mm-hmm. No, I think the question's a good one and it's a very important one, and we need to get practical about this. And I think that there was a fear during the workshop that it would be this great event and then we'd go back to business as usual on the following day, which was Wednesday. So we had this phrase was from Wednesday, how are things going to change? And that became a reoccurring theme. Because we saw the danger and the risk that this would be out of the ordinary and then nothing would actually change. So it was very important that we set some very clear outcomes and practical next steps. from the event. And so what we did in the last session was put up 3 flip charts, which were around sense making, solution mapping, and experimentation. And I wanted to really engage those brilliant young staff that I saw perhaps for the first time really come out of their shell during the workshop, and just keep them engaged. And so we asked them to nominate themselves for one of the groups. And the response was overwhelming, and it's still growing. And so now we have 72 people from the office signed up for one of these 3 groups. And these people are now part of these streams that will act as the bridge between the lab and the office. So when the new lab heads, these 3 heads come on board, it's clear to me what they're head of. They're head of streams that have approximately 25 people in them from the program and projects, as well as from operations. And they will have prepared the office for these heads when they come on board. So that's a very concrete action, and the key now is to keep that energy level and momentum with that group. So they're working on their work plans, they're reaching out to partners, they're tapped into the regional network through the Regional Innovation Centre. They're having trainings, webinars on sense making and these different concepts. And they understand that the kinds of skills that they're learning through these groups are the kinds of skills that they need to equip them for the future of work. So there's a very clear professional career incentive for them individually as well to be part of these groups. So the recognition, rewards, and incentives are also clear. And I've given a very clear message to managers to empower their teams and give them the freedom to create and go and have a space to be part of these teams and try new things. So that's one very concrete follow-up that we've done. A second is the partnerships, and I'm excited that we're signing today a partnership with Honeybee Network, which is in India, this great network that collects and documents innovative solutions for scale up and for policy. And it's very much about frugal innovation, which is the concept that's popular in India. And innovations for the poor, by the poor, that lead to structural change. So we're partnering with this great organization, and I'm keen that the teams actually go on one of these innovation walks through the villages to see how we go about mapping innovations in a very practical way. So those partnerships with outside organizations are really critical, and I think one of the takeaways for me is we really don't know who the partners are outside. We are very internally focused, and we actually, with exceptions of course, but we really don't know enough about what's going on outside the organization. So these partnerships are going to be really, really key. A third thing that we're doing is writing letters. I'm writing letters to all the partners that we see on the ground. We've got frontline health workers in every state in India. We have women entrepreneurs. We have biodiversity champions, and we have an army of waste pickers who we work with on recycling and circular economy. So in the next couple of days, I'm going to be writing to all these people through our networks and saying, share your solutions with us, and we will recognize them, and we will reward them, and we will try and scale them up. So that's a third thing that we're doing, again, to really change the way we identify solutions. And then finally, I think it sounds very mundane and boring, but we did have a quarterly monitoring meeting at the end of April. And we asked these 3 streams to basically take over the event. And I was amazed at how the culture changed. They were able to stand back from their projects, and they were able to provide this overview of the portfolio, the patterns that we're seeing, both positive opportunities but bottlenecks, and suggesting some solutions on how we can experiment to change. So even in very practical, internal ways, we're seeing the role that these three streams can have in changing the culture of the organization.
This is very fascinating. If I can jump in, one of the things that really comes out is that without ever saying that you wanted to build these development solution teams, these integrated cross-silo groupings, what it sounds like is with the different streams, getting 20, 30 people behind these essentially functions, sense-making, exploration, portfolio design, you are building a bit of a network in the office where if I'm a disaster specialist, whose tribe is my disaster project, right now in the way UNDP is structured, I'm also now spending a portion of my time in a tribe that's looking at various different ways in which I can explore the solution space, as you say. Could you just tell us quickly about what do you see as some of the risks and opportunities in terms of individual staff being able to take what they're learning from the stream and integrate it into their program work? Because this is where it really starts bringing massive value in terms of the country office work and portfolio.
Yeah. I think the main risk is that this whole Accelerator Lab initiative is seen as a lot of hype that eventually fizzles out. And if we are going to avoid that, it does mean getting cultural change. And I wouldn't estimate the amount of change that requires in an office. I think that there are two things I would say in terms of, addressing the risks. The first thing is, do not underestimate the colossal size of the challenge of becoming more partner-oriented and more outward-oriented. We are so wrapped up in our internal processes and deadlines and delivery that actually making a conscious effort to partner with others unlike ourselves requires a very different way of working. And it needs to be an office-wide effort. It can't just be a few individuals. So I think that is huge. And that's why the Honeybee Network for us is significant. And the letters to reach out to the frontline health workers and so on, the champions of change. Those are two statements that we're changing the way we work. The second thing is, we were seeing resistance during the 2 days of workshop. This is great, but there's no time, and our systems don't allow it, and we have to focus on delivery. So that reaction was coming from people when they were listening and participating in the workshop. To which I said, this is not an add-on. This is not nice to have. This is integral to everything we do. Everybody in this room needs to understand that this means that we have to change the way we work every day. And so when you see it not as an innovation thing that's separate and on the side, but integral to everything we do, then it doesn't necessarily mean extra work. Actually, it means doing what you're doing now, but much better and more effectively. And so I think when people understand that, and when these kinds of practices and behaviors become normal to us, it's not going to be more work. It's just going to be more effective work.
So Francine, something I'm really interested in learning a bit about is if we're getting people in the office to do new things, what maybe are some of the things that they might stop doing? How are we thinking about enabling the change in behavior?
I don't know if that's the right question, because I can't really think of anything that you would actually have to be able to stop doing. But I do think that by adopting these behaviors and these different ways of working, we will become so much more efficient. So, when we develop proposals based on experiments and based on collaboration with different kinds of partners, those proposals for resource mobilization that will become part of our pipeline will have such a greater success, likelihood of success. So I think it will improve our resource mobilization efforts hugely. Similarly, you know, when we listen to partners and when we see partners, you know, donors, not just as providers of money, but actual real partners who are co-designing solutions with us, if we are ready to listen to them when they criticize us and we employ these kind of more empathetic type approaches, I think we won't get into the kind of problems that we get into with them. The relationship will be much stronger and we won't be spending so much time troubleshooting. Similarly, when, you know, we're working better as one team and we're able to look across the portfolio and identify opportunities for working across teams in a better way, again, we're going to be much more effective. So I really don't think it's about picking up one thing and dropping another thing. It's just about doing what we do better.
Francine, I'm interested, now you're moving from India to lead the office in Serbia. What are some of the things that you will take away from this experience in the new country office, which has a fantastic team? It is the first country office who has actually hired the Accelerator Lab team. This is question one. And question two is if you can share some tips and tricks for experience with your res rep peers, because we are in this interesting moment when all the reps are sort of assuming their new positions. What would they be?
Okay. I think the first lesson for me is to prepare the office well, prepare the mothership, so that the mothership understands what the lab is for. I think before we had this workshop, we had some vague understanding, but we didn't fully understand how it relates to us and how it's important for the work that we do in the office. It was still on the side. So I think having a 2-day workshop to really understand and not feel threatened by the lab, but see why it's important and relevant for our day-to-day projects and program work is a very important thing for the office, so that they own it. That's really critical, that they own the lab. And that's what we were able to achieve. And for managers to, again, create the space and empower staff so that they can engage with that lab. That's, I think, number one, critical. I think we were stuck before we had the workshop in sort of answering more logistics type questions like, where is it located? Inside, outside the government, state, national level, these kinds of questions. But actually, these are secondary questions to the ultimate question, which is, what is the purpose of the lab? And how are we going to engage with it? And so I think understanding the purpose of what you're trying to do in terms of how you're going to work differently as a result is also really important before you start discussing these kind of more secondary questions about location and positioning in relation to the government and so on. The third thing I would say is that it is really important to engage the young people and not just the team leaders. Oftentimes our habit is to reach out to the team leaders to get things done. What I saw in terms of the dynamic in the workshop was that the team leaders were sitting back in their chairs, and then all the other people in the office, the people who get things done, were really busy applying their ideas and creativity. And it's that energy that we need to tap into. So finding a way to, again, challenge the hierarchy and engage the young people and the go-getters and the, in the office is really important. And so for us, those 3 streams that we established, who will work as the bridge between the lab and the office, are a very good way of keeping the office engaged and motivated. And then fourthly, I would say the partnerships. The danger that I see is that we just, again, go internal and just look at the lab in terms of how we work on it inside the organization. And I think from day one, we need to start exploring outside. And so consciously finding out who are those partners that we're not aware of, and talking to them and developing partnerships with them. So from day one, making sure we understand very well the kind of partnerships that we can develop with those who can provide solutions outside. I think those would be my 4 lessons from what we've done here in India.
So thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Accelerator Labs Coffee Chats. We are looking forward to any kinds of suggestions that you have about topics you'd like us to go explore and dig around about. Send us articles that you think are really interesting that you'd like to discuss. We will get back to some of the episodes where we talk about articles. And until the next episode, we're looking forward to seeing you again.